The laughter was loud enough to stop the entire room. He pointed to her shoes, old, worn, with the soles peeling off, while his fiancée and her friends laughed unabashedly. "Are you here to serve coffee or beg for charity?" he asked, and the entire room turned to stare at the young woman in a simple uniform, balancing a tray of cups. The embarrassment was absolute. She pressed her lips together, didn't say a word. She just stared into the man's eyes with a strange calm, as if she were keeping a secret. No one knew her name, but everyone laughed at her that day, except for one person who noticed something, a detail that no one else noticed. The old shoes had a leather label that had been out of the market for years, a rare handmade edition, exclusive to international fashion shows. But it was too late. The humiliation had already happened, and the security cameras had recorded it all. Without warning, 3 months later, that same man stopped in front of the television in a 5-star hotel in Paris. The screen showed a haute couture show broadcast live. He almost dropped the glass in his hand when he saw it. It was her, the waitress, the girl with the old shoes. She was walking in the same shoes, now restored and prized by international critics. A close-up of the camera revealed the inscription embroidered on the heel. First experimental line by V. Elins, 1994. Rare, valuable, untouchable. And the girl, now the season's breakout model, closed the show to a standing ovation. The millionaire fell to his knees on the couch in shock. At the same moment, his face went viral alongside the old video, the one of the humiliation in the event hall. The world did not forgive him for laughing. And now he would have to watch, day after day, the girl he had humiliated shine with the very thing he had despised. And as he watched without blinking, the world applauded what he despised. If this twist surprised you, like it now and subscribe, because the story is just beginning. The ballroom at the Lancaster Hotel was sparkling in every detail. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light onto tables decorated with imported glasses and carefully arranged flowers. Men in ties gestured with champagne flutes. Women in glittering dresses smiled for invisible cameras, and the background music seemed to float elegantly between the false smiles. It was the most exclusive charity event of the season, where millionaires disguised their vanity with generous donations to charity. At the center of it all was him, Ethan Wells, heir to one of the largest holding companies on the East Coast, surrounded by noisy friends, all too young to understand the weight of appearances. Ethan was charismatic, handsome, implacably rich, and he knew it. Nothing around him contradicted him, not even his fiancée, Olivia, a socialite more concerned with selfies than with speeches on stage. Near the curtains, in absolute silence, a young woman balanced a silver tray. She walked slowly, avoiding the guests without being noticed, as if she were part of the furniture. Her simply tied hair and impeccable uniform said she was an ordinary employee, but there was something in her eyes that did not match the humility of her position. A serene, observant look, as if she listened to everything and judged nothing. Her name was Hannah. Few knew, and even fewer cared. Her cheap plastic heels made a slight noise on the marble floor, and her shoes, visibly old, worn, with dry leather, clashed violently with the luxury around them. It was Ethan who first noticed the shoes, not because he was observant, but because he stumbled over his own ego when he noticed something that stained the perfection of the party. He discreetly pointed to her feet, whispering to Olivia, who held back her laughter with her hand. A friend next to him saw it and made a joke. Another heard it and raised his voice. Within seconds, the circle of millionaires was looking at her. Hannah stopped next to them with her tray, extended, offering drinks. Ethan then broke the silence with a mocking comment. "Are you from the last decade, or are those shoes decomposing?" The laughter exploded. Hannah didn't move a muscle. She just looked him in the eye and responded with a silence so firm that it made one of his friends stop laughing. But most of them continued, and the ballroom continued its glamorous night. No one there imagined that this seemingly irrelevant moment would be recorded by the hotel cameras. And that, weeks later, that invisible girl would walk across a stage in front of the entire world wearing the same shoes. Hannah's first pair of shoes wasn't bought, they were found. She was 8 years old when she saw them, covered in dust, at the bottom of a box donated to her local church. They were visibly old, made of genuine leather, with handcrafted details that had faded with age. Most kids her age would have preferred colorful sneakers or glittery sandals, but Hannah was mesmerized by the aged pair, as if she recognized something in them that others couldn't. She asked her pastor's permission to take the shoes home, where she spent days cleaning every corner, sewing up the tears, and patiently gluing the soles. She never left them behind ever since. Her childhood was filled with silence and absence. She grew up in a forgotten part of Pittsburgh, where row houses shared not only walls, but also the fear of no tomorrow. Her mother disappeared before she was 5. Her father, a former factory worker, got drunk and died in a winter without heating. Hannah was raised by a great-aunt who sewed dresses for ladies in the upper class, women who barely knew the name of the person who mended their luxuries. From her, she learned to observe, listen, and wait. She never asked for anything, but she listened to everything. At 15, she was selling candy outside school and cleaning at night. She never complained. Hannah always believed that the beauty of things didn't depend on how much they cost, but on how many stories they carried. That's why she kept her old shoes even when she got new ones. They reminded her of who she was, and maybe, subconsciously, she knew that one day they would take her somewhere. While the world ran after shine, she walked in silence, her feet firmly planted in that patched pair. She got into college on merit, but dropped out in the second semester due to lack of money. The scholarship she had received did not cover housing, food, or books, and she preferred to work rather than beg. She started as a receptionist at a party buffet. She learned quickly, dressed discreetly, worked double shifts, and always smiled with her eyes, even when no one smiled back. Her secret dream was to design costumes. She spent late nights scribbling in a notebook hidden among the tablecloths in the storage room. But Hannah never told anyone about this. She knew that dreams, when exposed too early, become easy targets for those who never had the courage to dream. So she kept them, like she kept her shoes. One day, at the end of a gala event, she found a piece of fabric forgotten behind the stage. She picked it up and took it home, turning it into a hairband. The next day, a famous fashion designer noticed the detail and asked where she had bought it. Hannah humbly replied, "I made it at home." The woman smiled. "You have ancient hands." No one understood, but Hannah did. It was the beginning of something. A silent call to a place that didn't yet have a name. She just had to keep walking, even if her shoes hurt. The benefit party at the Lancaster was not just a night of charity. It was a secret stage of vanity, where businessmen, heirs, and socialites competed with smiles and staged donations. Behind the glasses and applause, each gesture was a disguised dispute. Who showed up the most? Who donated the most? Who dictated the invisible rules for that bored elite? Ethan Wells, at the height of his 30s, ruled that scene like someone playing with marked pieces. He had inherited not only the family empire, but also the arrogance that comes from never having been thwarted. That night, one of his closest friends, Travis, arrived to tell him that a fashion columnist was at the event, quietly scouting who was worthy of a cover. Ethan, of course, couldn't help but stand out. With his sparkling bride by his side, his tailored suit on, and his speech prepared, he was waiting for the right moment to shine. But he felt like there was still something missing that would put him at the center of everyone's attention. That was when Travis threw out his challenge. Laughing, he pointed at Hannah, who was passing by at the back of the room. $10,000 if you can make everyone laugh at that waitress and without touching her. Ethan raised an eyebrow. It was a childish, spiteful proposition, exactly the kind of game these men, armed with money and boredom, liked to play. Olivia, standing nearby, feigned surprise, then laughed too. "Let's see what you've got, honey." That was what he needed, a stage, an audience, a victim. Hannah approached calmly, her posture erect and her steps slow. The tray in her hands reflected the lights in the room. Ethan looked at her old shoes with disdain, and the idea came to him at once. When she reached the circle, he bowed theatrically, as if he were going to pay her a compliment. He picked up a glass and said loudly, for everyone to hear, "Tell me something, young lady. Are those shoes Part of the gala costume, or did you borrow them from some exhibition from the last century? The laughter started out timid, but soon gained strength. Olivia laughed exaggeratedly. Travis applauded silently. Hannah stopped. She looked at Ethan with steady eyes, then at his friends. She didn't say a word. She just carefully placed the tray on the table and stood there, her feet firmly on the floor, meeting every glance that came at her like a spear. Her silence was louder than any response, but to Ethan it was just another victory. He turned around triumphantly, as if he had just proven that he could do anything. But from across the room, someone was watching. An older woman with silver hair and a minimalist dress was silently observing everything. She was no ordinary guest. It was Evelyn Darcy, owner of one of the most prestigious experimental fashion agencies in Europe, and her eyes were fixed on Hannah's shoes, not because they were worn, but because they were rare, almost forgotten. Evelyn had created the shoes decades ago in a collection that was withdrawn from the market before it was launched. Only 3 pairs were made. One of them was now on the feet of the humiliated waitress, and that was no coincidence. The next morning, Hannah arrived at work before sunrise. The still damp hallways, still damp from the cleaning, were a contrast to the previous night's hustle and bustle. As she set the tables for the guests' breakfast, she heard footsteps echoing across the marble floor. She hadn't expected to see anyone at this hour, but it was him, Ethan Wells. No flashbulbs, no laughter, no friends around, just him, with the same haughtiness in his shoulders, but with something in his eyes that seemed restless. She continued stacking cups as if he weren't there, but he wasn't used to being ignored. He walked closer until he was less than 2 steps away from her. "Are you mute? Or just rude?" he said, with that semi-ironic tone he used to mask any real feelings. Hannah took a deep breath. Slowly and carefully she looked up and met his eyes. "I don't usually talk to people who don't apologize to me." The sentence, spoken in a low, firm voice, struck Ethan like a jarring note. No one had ever spoken to him like that, especially not someone on her level. He laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh. "Apologies. Why? It was just a joke. You need to learn to laugh at yourself." Hannah turned, set the last glass on the table, and walked to the counter. He followed her. "What's your problem? It was nothing big. Are you making a big deal out of it?" She turned again, this time closer. Her eyes held an icy gleam. "My problem, Mr. Wells, is that what to you is no big deal to me is a lifetime of trying to be taken seriously." Ethan felt the impact of those words, but he hid them. He still believed he was in control of the situation, and as if he needed to reaffirm that, he made another comment. "You're too proud for someone who serves." Coffee in torn shoes. Hannah smiled for the first time, but it wasn't a smile of weakness. It was a calm, almost motherly smile. "You think you know the value of things just because you can buy them. I know the value of things because I had to earn them." He didn't answer. He just stood there, watching her pick up the empty tray and head toward the back. For the first time, Ethan didn't have an answer on the tip of his tongue. For the first time, he felt like he was in front of someone who wasn't impressed by anything he represented. That same afternoon, a discreet envelope was left at the hotel reception. It was addressed to Hannah. Inside was a handwritten invitation to a private meeting with Evelyn Darcy. The card read, "We need to talk about your shoes." Hannah told no one. She simply folded the note and tucked it into the lining of her purse. The next night, when Ethan returned to the salon with his friends, he didn't see her among the staff. He felt strangely uncomfortable with her absence, but he didn't comment. He just stood there in silence, observing the places where she usually went, and for the first time he felt that perhaps he had done something wrong. But his world was still intact, and for someone like Ethan, silence was just noise. He didn't yet know that that first contact was the beginning of everything to come. 2 days later, the Lancasters' main ballroom hosted another exclusive event, a private preview of a contemporary art auction. Even more, select guests milled about among extravagant sculptures and signed canvases priced as absurdly as the compliments exchanged. Ethan, as always, was one of the most sought-after hosts. He wore a petrol blue suit fresh from Milan, flanked by Olivia, who wore a silver dress chosen not for elegance but for numerical value. It was in this scenario that Hannah appeared again, but now in another sector of the hotel, allocated as emergency support at the external buffet. She wasn't supposed to be there, but a change of schedule took her to the heart of the event, and directly in front of the man who still echoed in her memory with the sound of laughter. This time she was carrying a tray of fine canapes. Her shoes were the same, squeaky clean, but still the same. The old leather now shone as if it had been restored with golden hands. Ethan saw her from afar and, in an automatic gesture, commented too loudly to the group around him. How many wars did those shoes survive? Laughter again. A woman nearby covered her mouth, trying to contain her laughter. Olivia, who recognized Hannah immediately, whispered something venomous in her fiancé's ear. Does she still think she can walk among us with that on her feet? Hannah's tray shook, but her eyes remained steady. She kept walking as if she hadn't heard, but the words came next, sharp as arrows. "Young lady," said Ethan, in a theatrical tone, as if presenting a show. "Tell us, are these shoes a family heirloom, or just an archaeological experiment?" The collective laughter was too loud. A nearby waiter dropped a glass in fright. All eyes turned to her. Hannah stopped. She looked at Ethan as if she were looking at a familiar figure. Silently, she crouched down, took off her shoes in front of everyone, and placed them on a marble table. The seemingly simple gesture froze the room. Barefoot, with a proud posture, she looked up and said calmly, "You can laugh, Mr. Wells, but I doubt you'll be able to carry the history that these shoes have lived." The sentence echoed, and for a few seconds the entire room fell silent. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but he couldn't find the words. The embarrassment was so palpable that some guests began to move away. Olivia looked away, and a discreet camera positioned next to the stage to film the auction captured the entire scene. The public humiliation had happened, but not for her. It was he now who faced strange looks, not for the wealth he displayed, but for the poverty of spirit he revealed. And Hannah, still barefoot, walked towards the exit without hurrying her steps. Every look that followed her was no longer of contempt. It was of doubt. Who was she, after all? And why, even barefoot, did she seem more whole than everyone else there? That night Hannah didn't go straight home. She took the subway to the old neighborhood where her great-aunt had lived, got off at the nearly empty station, and walked through the dark streets as if revisiting a scar. She stopped in front of the window of an old thrift store, where her first sewn sash was still on display, hanging like a forgotten piece of the past. She stood there for a few minutes, staring at her reflection in the dirty glass. She was no longer wearing her uniform, but she carried the same tiredness on her shoulders. She went inside. The lady who ran the thrift store, a friend of her late aunt, recognized Hannah immediately and gave her a silent hug. Inside, she sat down on a straw chair and took from her purse the folded invitation she had received a few days ago, the one signed by Evelyn Darcy. "I knew they would laugh," he said suddenly, looking at the floor. "I knew the shoes would attract attention, and not for the right reason. But it was necessary." The lady frowned. Hannah then took out of a bag an old notebook with yellowed pages, full of drawings, sketches of dresses, runway models, minute details of fabrics. "When my aunt left me, I swore that one day someone on the other side would see what was here. And if that meant letting them laugh at me, then so be it." She flipped through her notebook to a marked page. On it was a sketch of a dress inspired by the wings of migratory birds, a piece that Evelyn Darcy had shown in Paris 30 years earlier, but that had never made it to the runway because the collection had been cancelled due to budget cuts. Hannah had recreated the design to perfection, using only old backstage photos she'd retrieved from the internet and blown up to the last pixel. "I studied every stitch, every fold. She'll know it's no coincidence." The next day, Hannah arrived at the address on the card, an elegant, discreet building in the heart of Manhattan's Arts District. She went up to the top floor where she was greeted by a serene woman with grey hair and attentive eyes. Evelyn Darcy looked her over from head to toe, taking her time. She asked her to sit down. "You wore one of my rarest pairs. Where did you find it?" It was donated to the church when I was a child. I didn't know what it was at first, but I studied it, and I kept it. I never wanted to draw attention to myself. I just wanted someone to know I existed." Evelyn was silent for long seconds. Then she smiled. "You reminded me why I started." They talked for hours. Hannah showed her her notebook, her drawings, her ideas. Evelyn didn't say much, but she did something no one had ever done for Hannah. She listened deeply. On leaving, the stylist simply said, "You will hear my name again, but this time by your side." And then, in an almost complicit tone, he added, "You knew from the beginning, didn't you, that you were being watched?" Hannah looked back, still at the door, and replied, "I knew that if I bore the scorn with dignity, someone who truly understood would see through the torn leather." And he left, no longer needing to hide. Ethan was at LaGuardia Airport, about to board a flight to Geneva for an international conference, when his phone vibrated insistently. Travis had sent him a video with the caption, "You're going to love this." He opened the link absently, certain it was just another inside joke. But when he saw the frozen image in the thumbnail, he stopped. It was her face, Hannah, and not as a waitress, but in close-up under the bright lights of a stage. The video was a clip from a private show broadcast only to subscribers of a high-fashion magazine. Down the center of the catwalk, Hannah walked with a firm step, wearing a dreamlike creation, balancing herself in the very shoes he had so ridiculed. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Evelyn Darcy, sitting in the front row, gave her a standing ovation too. Ethan froze. He couldn't take his eyes off the screen. He quickly searched for more information. He found a taped backstage interview where the reporter talked about the promising discovery of the season, a young self-taught artist with a unique craft portfolio and a mysterious connection to Darcy's lost collection from the 1990s. The camera showed Hannah smiling serenely, humbly thanking him and citing the hands that taught her to sew with patience and walk with purpose. Travis sent another message. "Dude, that's her. The one from the salon, the shoes, remember? They're already calling her the girl with the heirloom. Your joke went viral, and that was when Ethan saw it." Another video, this time filmed in the Lancaster ballroom, was circulating on social media with devastating captions. "Millionaire humiliates girl who wore art on her feet." Alternative fashion channels were reacting to the video with outrage. Comments were multiplying exponentially. The world needs more Hannahs and fewer Ethans. He felt his face burn. A journalist during an opinion program even said, "There are those who recognize art by its market value, and there are those who feel it by its soul." Ethan Wells is the portrait of a generation that does not know how to distinguish history from appearance. That night, already at the hotel in Geneva, Ethan was unable to have dinner. He spent hours watching and re-watching interviews with her. He discovered that her full name was Hannah Elise Rowan, who had grown up in Pittsburgh, studied alone, worked since she was 16, and whose first original piece had been designed from scraps of fabric collected at events, like the Night of Humiliation. And then, on an obscure vintage fashion blog, he read a text that hit him like a silent stab. The author said, "While some are born surrounded by gold and never learn to see, others grow up with mud on their feet, but discover they can transform it into light." Ethan realized he had overlooked something precious. Not just a talent, but a story, a soul. A woman who had faced him without fear when he thought he was most invincible. And for the first time, he didn't feel pride. He felt shame. When Ethan returned to New York, the city no longer felt the same. There were billboards with her face in neighborhoods he'd never paid attention to before. Shop windows on Fifth Avenue advertised a capsule collection by Evelyn Darcy and the new silent star of American streetwear, Hannah Elise Rowan. The name echoed through halls of power that had previously known only inherited surnames, but she herself seemed to have disappeared. Ethan tried to find any physical trace. He returned to the Lancaster Hotel under the pretense of making a generous donation, only to learn that she had resigned days after the last event. He called acquaintances in the art scene, quietly inquired at meetings, scoured social media, but she remained invisible, like a fog that refused to be contained. In the silence of absence, Ethan began to notice things he had ignored before. He went back to the video of the humiliation in the ballroom, but this time not as a spectator, but as someone being watched. Every laugh, every mocking look, now deeply embarrassed him. He noticed Hannah's gaze at that moment, firm but wounded, strong but exhausted. It was the gaze of someone who already knew the world would not be fair, but who chose not to bow down. At night, Ethan walked alone through neighborhoods he had never been to. He visited the eastern part of Pittsburgh and found the thrift store mentioned in a brief article about Hannah, but it was already closed. An elderly woman, seeing him standing in the doorway, said coldly, "She doesn't live here anymore. And if you are who I think you..." There's no point in looking." He didn't answer. He just thanked her and left in silence. For the first time, he didn't know how to use his influence. His last name, his fortune, his looks, none of them seemed capable of opening the doors that really mattered now. Hannah had disappeared not out of anger, but out of decision. And that tormented him more than any explicit revenge. Over time, Ethan began attending smaller events, independent exhibitions, sewing workshops where he saw young people creating with their own hands. He began talking to designers he had previously ignored. He wanted to understand. He wanted to listen. But most of all, he wanted to meet her again. Not to make a public apology, not to reverse her image, but to see if there was still room for quiet repair. One cold afternoon, he sat alone in a modest cafe where he read on a handmade pamphlet, "Experimental fashion show featuring young talent. Free admission. Venue, Mercer Street Cultural Center." No famous names, no promise of status, but at the bottom of the pamphlet in small print it said, "Technical support, Her Atelier." Ethan knew it instantly. Her, Hannah Elise Rowan. It was as if the world were giving her a chance, not for public redemption, but for dignified silence. The video of the humiliation previously shared in alternative fashion circles broke through the barrier of anonymity and exploded on social media. An influencer with millions of followers reposted it with the caption, "A portrait of elite contempt for invisible talent." Within hours, the story went viral. Thousands commented, tagged fashion brand profiles, and exposed Ethan as the symbol of arrogance disguised as charm. A national TV journalist dedicated an entire editorial to the repercussions of the case. The images showed Hannah taking off her shoes with dignity, followed by Ethan's laughter, frozen in slow motion, with a melancholic soundtrack in the background. The question posed at the end of the program, how many dreams have you laughed at before seeing them blossom? The name Ethan Wells, once synonymous with success and heritage, became a source of shame even for his partners. His holding company saw its digital engagement plummet. Young people began symbolically protesting in front of the company's headquarters, wearing old shoes and leaving worn-out pairs of shoes on the front steps. They called it the Living Soul Manifesto. The media covered it live. The company's directors summoned him to an emergency meeting. Formal smiles were replaced by tense faces. One of the directors said firmly, "Ethan, we are losing contracts. Brands no longer want to associate their image with yours. And what bothers me the most, you have done absolutely nothing. No apology, no position." But how could he? Ethan knew that any public statement would seem like just another PR stunt. And what he felt now was genuine. For the first time in his life, he wanted not to clean up his image, but to understand what he had destroyed. Newspapers began to relive old episodes of contempt he had shown at parties and events. Phrases that had previously been read as intelligent sarcasm now sounded cruel. Even Olivia, his fiancée, broke off their engagement by email, claiming exposure was too toxic for her social circle. On social media, people organized campaigns like "Buy from Invisible Creators" and cited Hannah as an inspiration. She, who did not comment publicly on the video, began to be portrayed as a symbol of elegant resistance, and even celebrities began to wear pieces inspired by her silent aesthetic. Ethan's downfall did not come in the form of a legal scandal or bankruptcy. It was more cruel, symbolic oblivion. Brands refused invitations with his name on them. Influencers blocked his attempts to get closer. Events that were previously open to him now required image curation. And finally, the most unexpected news. A large contemporary fashion museum would hold an exhibition. Called Invisible Seams, What the Eyes Don't See History Wears, with Hannah's shoes as the centerpiece. The project's curator stated, "It's not about revenge. It's about remembrance, and about those who had to put on their shoes of contempt to walk towards their own dignity." Ethan, alone in his penthouse apartment, watched the press conference on television, and for the first time, he understood what it was like to fall without making a sound. The days passed slowly. Ethan began to live a routine he had never imagined. Silence. Not the comfortable silence of luxury apartments or helicopter rides with headphones on, but an internal, uncomfortable silence, the kind that forces you to look within. He no longer received invitations, his phone calls were reduced to administrative matters, and even the penthouse staff seemed to hesitate before greeting him. The name Ethan Wells still existed, but now it was a name loaded with weight, not prestige. It was then that he began to sneak out. He spent hours walking through the oldest neighborhoods in the city, where he had never set foot before. He visited street markets, second-hand bookshops, small cafes with crooked tables and the smell of real bread. He observed. He listened to conversations. He read notices posted on lampposts, sewing classes, original concerts, raffles to help sick neighbors. Real things. Things that cannot be bought. One afternoon he walked into a small community center with a faded facade and fogged-up windows. Inside, a group of young people were learning to sew, not with industrial machines but with needle and thread, the old-fashioned way. He sat on a bench in the back, not saying who he was. He just watched. A girl with thick braids was messing up her stitches and crying with rage. The volunteer who was with her knelt down and said, "That's just how it is. Every wrong stitch teaches you more than 10 right ones." That struck Ethan in a strange way. He came back the next day, and the next. And again. Soon he was helping to carry boxes of donated fabric, serving tea during breaks, listening to stories from people who would never have a place at his millionaire dinners. He wasn't looking for public redemption. There were no cameras, no columnists, no followers. There was just him alone, trying to figure out what to do with the shame that followed him like a shadow. One night, he opened a closet in the penthouse that he never used. Inside, he found the suit he had worn the night he humiliated Hannah. He touched the fabric, looked into his own eyes in the mirror, and took a deep breath. He took off the jacket, cut off the tag, and put it in a bag. The next day, he donated the entire thing to the community center. In the same package, he enclosed an envelope with a note. "May these clothes best fit those who can still be proud of how they wear them." She began to study designer fashion. She read about sustainable fabrics, about rejected collections, about the impact of the industry on the dignity of the hands that sew. She felt ashamed of everything she ignored, but she was no longer paralyzed. She wanted to learn. And then, one cloudy morning, he saw a poster pasted in a small coffee shop. Exhibition, Invisible Seams, Last Days. In the bottom corner, her name. For the first time, Ethan bought a ticket like any other ordinary citizen. No VIP invitations, no boxes, no recognition. He went in. He walked slowly and stopped in front of the glass display case where the shoes were, clean, intact, real. He stared at those shoes for several minutes, not as someone who sees an object, but as someone who finally understands the path he never had the courage to take. And in that moment, he didn't feel less powerful. He felt more human. The Invisible Seams exhibition occupied the top floor of a restored cultural building in Lower Manhattan. Its rooms had low lighting, an ethereal soundtrack, and handwritten plaques next to each piece. The curators opted for an intimate aesthetic, no flashiness, just history, texture, and presence. Each item told a silent story about pain, survival, and beauty, and among them, in the center of the main room, were the shoes, the same ones. untouched, sitting on a bare wooden pedestal without a glass dome, as if they still belonged to someone who could slip them on at any moment and walk away. Ethan stared at them in silence, alone. Around him, visitors watched, took pictures, whispered, but he heard nothing. He could feel the air around him grow heavy. There was something about the space that seemed to forgive and accuse at the same time. A group of students approached. One girl said softly, "She wore them one night when she was humiliated. And yet, look at the state of them." Ethan closed his eyes. The words pierced his chest like needles. He turned to leave, but then he saw her, standing at the back of the room, between two concrete columns, wearing a simple dress, rawhide sandals and her hair loose, as if she no longer needed to hide from anything. Hannah, more mature, more serene, but with the same firm gaze as before. Her eyes met his, without surprise, without haste, as if she already knew he would come. For a moment, Ethan thought about backing away, but he couldn't. His feet moved on their own. He walked toward her with a weight on his chest that he couldn't name. When he stood face to face with her, his throat felt dry. He tried to speak, but she cut him off before he could even say a word. "Are you seeing now?" he asked in a low voice. He nodded. His eyes were moist, his gaze was wavering. He tried to find some phrase that would do justice to what he wanted to say, but nothing seemed to suffice, so he simply said, "I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to thank you because you were the one who woke me up." She looked at him for a few more seconds. There was no anger on her face, no irony, just an old weariness of someone who has seen a lot and still chose not to harden. "People think the humiliations we suffer define us," she said, now looking at the shoes on the pedestal. "But what defines us is what we do with them afterwards." Ethan lowered his head. For the first time, he listened without the need to defend his existence. "Have you changed?" Hannah asked gently. He hesitated, then replied, "Not enough, but I don't want to stop trying." She smiled, a small, genuine smile that lasted just long enough to ease the weight of the world between them. "That's more than I expected." He looked up. There was something there, an invisible bridge built with every wrong step that he now tried to correct. The silence between them was no longer discomfort. It was acceptance. Then she held out her hand, not to shake his, but to invite him to walk beside her, among the pieces in the exhibition. And he followed her, without titles, without justifications, just two distinct paths that, by irony or destiny, crossed in the only place where the value of things was not measured by appearance but by truth. They walked side by side through the exhibit in silence. Each piece told a memory that only Hannah could fully decipher. Ethan kept a small, respectful distance, as if approaching a sacred altar. He didn't ask questions, he just looked, absorbed, recognized. As they passed the sketches on display, he noticed that many of the lines seemed familiar. They were the drawings she had made by hand among tablecloths and shelves of clean dishes. Drawings that at the time he would never have looked at twice. They stopped in front of a mannequin that held a burnt brown dress with asymmetrical seams and subtle embroidery. A small card next to it read, "Made from donated fabric, sewn in the wee hours of the morning. Inspired by my aunt's mourning attire." Ethan swallowed. He recognized the name of the woman Hannah had mentioned the one time she'd allowed herself to talk about her past. She pointed at the piece with her eyes and said, "That was the first one that made me believe that I could build my place, without asking, without begging, without needing to please anyone." Ethan looked at her with a soft pain in his eyes. He said nothing. He knew any words would sound like self-pity or an attempt at redemption, and he didn't want to be redeemed. He just wanted to accept whatever was necessary. They walked to the last hallway, where there was a display of small glass cases containing Hannah's personal belongings. A handkerchief with embroidered initials, a rusty needle, and in the center, carefully folded, was the notebook of old sketches, the same one she kept hidden when she was still in uniform. He almost cried when he saw it there. "Do you still sew by yourself?" she finally asked in a low voice. "Always," Hannah replied without taking her eyes off her notebook. "Your hands still remember what they've been through." And then, finally, she faced him head-on. There, in front of the exposed memories, There was no audience, no hidden audience, no social networks, just the two of them, history against history, silence against silence. Ethan, what you did to me was not just expose me, it was denying me the right to exist with dignity. And when the world looked at me for the first time, it was through your cruelty. You were the lens, and also the mirror. He wanted to answer, but he couldn't. His body felt heavy. And yet, I don't hate you, because hating you would be carrying you with me. And I chose to free myself. She took a deep breath. I don't forgive you with words. I forgive with absence, with peace. Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to move on. And then, with a light gesture, she touched his arm and said, "The door is there. My story continues on another path. Don't follow me, and don't look back waiting for me." Ethan didn't try to stop her. He just nodded. His eyes were watery. No pride, no apologies, just presence. And in that moment, he understood. Sometimes forgiveness is not reconciliation, it is freedom. She turned and walked down a side hallway, and he stood there, standing still, alone among dresses and shoes and scars stitched together with silence. And he felt, with a delicate strength, that he was finally learning what it was to lose with dignity. The day dawned slowly. The city was still waking up in shades of grey when Ethan left the exhibition building. In his hands, there was no bag, no souvenir, no record. Just a small, folded piece of paper with her name, Hannah Elise Rowan, handwritten on the bottom of a technical file forgotten on the floor. He walked through the still empty streets, passing alleys where vendors set up their stalls and street performers tuned their instruments. He stopped at a flower stand, bought a single white dahlia and continued on without direction. Hours later, on top of a forgotten hill where almost no one went, he found the weathered wooden bench that overlooked the old neighborhood, where she had grown up. He sat there. He remained silent for long minutes. Then he stood up, took off his own leather shoes, and carefully placed them next to the flower, right in front of the bench. He walked down the hill barefoot, feeling the cold ground beneath his feet. He didn't look back. Up there, next to the dahlia and the expensive shoes, was the piece of paper, now loose in the wind, with the name of the person who taught the world that there are things that neither time, nor laughter, nor contempt can erase, and the bench remained empty, but never again anonymous. If you've come this far, it's because this story touched something inside you. Comment now. I also walk with dignity. I want to know who felt every step of this silent journey. If this story made you think, leave a like, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Because here, every story has a soul. And now, watch the video that is appearing on your screen. It's as strong as this one. It will move you and make you see the world with different eyes. We'll meet there.